all the contracts and SLAs and KPIs with external providers. And it's an area in terms of information and data that I think is worthy of a few moments of consideration. How do we make sure we are accessing or being provided with the right levels of data, performance metrics? And here's a friend of mine, not really, NEC3 term service contract. It's one of the NEC3 family of contracts designed to generate more collaboration between the contracting parties. Some of you may well have put this in place with your respective workforces. And I've worked with several large public and private sector organisations the last few years in implementing this and working with teams to train people to put it in place. It's not perfect. It's got its pros and cons. By and large, I would say it's the best fit that we currently have for setting out the contractual relationship for FM services. But for me, there is still the issue here of its origin in construction. Do we not need a contract for FM services designed and built from the ground up for facilities management? If we want the representation and standing in our industry that I think we deserve, do we not need our own contract? Subject for another day, perhaps. Open-ended question. But I think to refocus just a little bit on what we focused on this morning, I think we all accept that business needs are not fixed. The right FM strategy needs to adapt and flex as end-user demands reflect the development in different ways of working, interactions with workspaces, we said this morning, and the tools and equipment that facilitate this. Many of you, people across the FM community have said in recent years, why do I need a new way of doing something I've been doing well for so long? FMs do tend to be very good organisers of both people and information. They have to be. But for me, it's somewhat missing the point. This isn't about just being able to demonstrate ability at managing information, a key role in so many jobs. For me, this is more about our identity at work. Much of the information we manage on a day-to-day basis has its origins with other parties, and we run the risk of being bit part players. We should be looking to be fully accountable and responsible for our organisation's working arrangements, for the environments our colleagues operate in. And I know many of you, if not all of you here today, they probably are before I'm lynched, but it's not always the case. Where is the standard assessment and achievement of skills and competencies that we can evidence to others as a reason to look to us to inform and provide solutions? We don't have a framework recognised by our real estate peers and those outside of our industry to measure us against. If we think of other professions such as doctors and lawyers and teachers, we immediately assume a certain level of competency and professionalism. Health and safety practitioners is another one. We don't have that in FM. We have qualifications, but we don't have a gold standard. Certainly not recognisable outside of our industry. We need to clarify and raise the bar on the levels of entry to FM as a profession. What does it mean to be a facilities manager? So this slide, an obvious one, is actually holding up a sign because who knows what's behind that sign? And that's perhaps the issue here. Employees should be at the heart of FM strategy. I think I made that point this morning. I think it's absolutely essential. Forward-thinking facilities management professionals must consider what the requirements of employees of the future will be and how these will need to be communicated. And the technology capability of today's workforce far exceeds that of any previous generation, as we've spoken about today. Many employees now have mobile telephones with instant access to the internet, allowing them to interact with real-time information about the world inside and outside of the workspace. Controls and protocols around how this information is accessed at work need to be considered not only to ensure a productive workforce, but also to assess the ways in which staff can access information about the workspace. Traditionally, the domain of the facilities manager. In the future, rather than communicating, for example, a building's energy and sustainability performance to employees in a monthly newsletter, facilities managers are likely to be informed by staff on how the building is performing in real time due to innovations in mobile technology. And in fact, I think in some buildings that's happening now. So I think with environmental issues more important or more prominent than ever, this puts more pressure on FM and property managers to set out, communicate and deliver the right FM strategy if they want to retain the best staff in their business and influence their behaviour. Linking just a few things that I've mentioned already, some success stories in how this has worked, how FM integration at the design and construction stage and listening to the requirements of the building user throughout the design stage. So building on the top left is the World Wildlife Fund headquarters in Woking. I worked on this building. I was a whole life cost consultant there. And this was a fantastic example of how workspace can be designed for the end user in mind and to have a successful outcome. It's a great example of what can be achieved. But it's not a typical building or one that has a typical occupier. The World Wildlife Fund were very clear about what sort of space they wanted as a result of the project and were rightly influential through the design. But that's not the standard approach to new builds or major refurbishments. It should be, it could be, but we need more empirical evidence that demonstrates the positives of FM involvement all the way through the design and construction stages of property development. Another excellent example of just how well designed a space can be. This is the Edge building on the right there in Holland, the so-called smartest building in the world. Building users have an app on their smartphones which controls the environment around them, temperature, humidity preferences, and directing them to their workspace for the day based on what tasks they have to perform that day. No one has their own desk, and I understand if you're approaching from a car, they even take you to a space that's nearer where you're going to work for that day. Although it did occur to me that should you not be not using a car if it's the greenest workplace. But anyway. So what do future building users want from their workspace? There was a fascinating article on the RICS website recently about what millennials, and I've got the quote now so I remember it from this morning, those of us born between 1980 and 1995, apparently called millennials. There was an article by Dr. Marie Puyborough from JLL, and it highlighted several key themes on this, which I think FM cannot afford to ignore. Interaction. The way in which millennials interact is different, and workspaces need to be reconfigured to allow much more highly connected activities. Flexibility. Essential, important. We're probably all looking at it within our workspaces. But actually, most of us want to work in the same place as colleagues for the majority of the time, sharing ideas and having a sense of belonging. Cultural impact on the workspace is important, whereby the space you work in should reflect the cultural norms and accepted behaviours of the workforce. And the gap between the equipment one is given by one's employer, saying nothing, and that which one is actually for personal use, companies need to invest in the technology more than ever before. All of these themes can and should be driven by the facilities manager. So for me, one of my, I missed that slide, I was going to put that one up, that's a shame. Anything to get Game of Thrones on there, never mind. That's millennials. So anyway, in terms of stakeholder engagement, last theme for me today. Really, really key issue, I think. Development of FM strategy and the delivery of services that flow from it can be a very complex process involving multiple stakeholders, whether it's in-house delivery, FM managing agent model, or total FM service. Professional consultancy advice on the best model, delivery model, allows the application of expertise in knowing what works and what doesn't. Forgive the very brief sales pitch. So I've spoken today about some of the themes I think FM needs to consider. Perhaps one of the biggest issues I think we face as a wider industry, and one that's not often addressed, is the disconnect between our respective specialisms across the property industry. Of course we need sector and skill set expertise, but clients will struggle to realise true value from the property services industry until we're able to offer a more joined up, uniform approach to solving the myriad challenges that our fascinating world of work presents, rather than the separation and delineation that most current problem solving still takes. I believe that FM has a big part to play here. It needs to bring its overarching and nascent strategic and tactical skills to bear, to coordinate disparate expertise to find the right solution. And this really should be the value that great FM brings. I still smile, I mentioned it to people I was talking to at lunch, I still smile now when I see advertisements for facilities management roles that require an engineering or other technical qualification. I can assure you I don't need this to be a success. I know what the problem is, I know what the risks and implications are, and how they will impact upon my customers. I know what skill sets to bring to bear, and I have the expertise to manage the solution through to a successful resolution. So, to conclude, there's no doubt many things I haven't covered today. Energy and sustainability, briefly touched on it. The debate in in-source versus outsource, I don't think that's a new theme, but I think it's a very current, a very relevant theme still. Changes in law, CDM. But as I've said on my blog, buildings have traditionally been assessed on measurement of space, location,